Mark your calendars, it's been 10 years since the collapse of Lehman Brothers. One of the voices saying that it could happen all over again, she was actually on the scene for that. And I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. Madeline Antonchik was the chief risk officer at Lehman Brothers from 2002 until 2007. Here's part of what she had to say in the New York Times today. Quote, Lehman knew precisely the risks it was taking. It was my job to know those risks and communicate them to the rest of the senior leadership team. There came a time when they were not interested in hearing what I had to say. And Lehman lost its way. Risk management was repeatedly overruled. Okay, we've seen a lot of regulations since then. What about that? Quote, the unintended consequence is that risk has shifted away from banks to less transparent, unregulated entities. For example, the increase in capital requirements have helped feed the so-called shadow banking system. Because new rules limit banks from making leveraged loans, hedge funds and private equity firms have taken up the slack and provide direct financing. This is hardly the outcome, she says, intended by the regulators. This peer-to-peer lending is not regulated in the same way banks are, and moving this lending to shadow banks reduces transparency to regulators. Then she says, to me, the biggest risk of all has not been adequately addressed. What I learned from the Lehman experience is the importance of governance. Leadership is about doing the right thing, and no one should go unchallenged when they're about to make a questionable decision. This culture of checks and balances is still lacking in many organizations. Meanwhile, Alan Schurter at CBS Money Watch is tallying the signs we are on the precipice. Again, check out his list. The share of national income captured by the richest 10% of Americans rose from 34% in 1980 to 47% in 2016. Between 1980 and 2016, the share of America's income going to the top 1% nearly doubled, while that going to the bottom 50% plunged. After declining following the Depression, the top 1% share of wealth in the U.S. has shot back up roughly to where it was in the 1930s. Between 1970 and 2016, the gap between the richest and poorest Americans jumped 27 percentage points. 27 percentage points. Last point, as of 2017, by some measures, CEOs at large companies, on average, earned more than 300 times what the typical worker made, up from 58 times in 1989 and 20 times in 1965. Let me give you that back. As of 2017, by some measures, CEOs at large companies, on average, earned more than 300 times what the typical worker made, up from 58 times in 1989 and 20 times in 1965. That is from Lehman Brothers is Long Gone, but the Economic Rot Lingers, recommended reading at the CBS News site.